So what if Metallica were to front like they never heard of Black Sabbath? That would be silly, right? Well, what if Metallica were to front like they never heard of Budgie, Diamond Head, or Queen, or The Misfits, or Merciful Fate, or any of those bands who they covered? You know, they just fronted like they never heard the original song and their cover tune. You know what I mean? Whatever, right? I see things like that. You know, if you, for example, you know, if you're going to do a notched boulder bench where the one leg is a boulder that has a notch into it and the other leg is a flat top, and you've got the short leg style of boulder bench. And if you don't credit me, then what are you doing? You're doing a cover tune without crediting the originator. Now look, I can't even make a big deal about this. I don't consider this in any way, shape, or form my most major contribution. In fact, it might be my most minor contribution. You know, and then there's people out there who I consider an originator, but maybe they're not, but whatever. There's people who I consider originators of a certain style or what have you, who have been covered so many times it's ridiculous. You know, like talk about like Lou French, right? How many people, including myself, have been inspired by that guy, right? Does this guy ever get credit? You know, and how many others who have came long before me have innovated and then been imitated without ever being credited, right? How often does that happen? Well, look, how fine of a point do you want to put on this sort of thing, you know? If you're an artist, or if I'm an artist, or an artisan, whatever, you know, if you're a creator, you can't always track your influence, right? Anything that you create might have multiple sources of inspiration, or it might have one source of inspiration, and then that's just like a springboard, right? Like, think about like a diving board. You bounce off of this, go off into your own abyss. You know, go out into the wild blue yonder and create your own thing. Well, that's cool if you actually create your own thing. But how often is there? Look, there's things that happen. How often do you see a post of something somebody else created, get inspired, and decide, you know what, I can do that too? And then you don't even like the original post. You want to front. You want the world. You want there to be no trace of the fact. You know what I'm saying? Come on now. I ain't naming no names. Well, people do this. People see somebody else's work, be inspired, and want there to be no trace of them ever having seen the work, and then they're just copying. You're literally like rubbernecking off somebody else's, test scores. So anyway, these things happen. And you know, this is just continuing the conversation of originality and credit, and we all do it. You know what I mean? To some extent, right? You get inspired, so you know, some people just don't have an original idea in their head in their entire life, I think. Again, I'm not naming names, but I know people who are basically a cover band, a cover artist, who are just doing their own simplified, dumbed down, you know, bad imitation, right? A poor cover version. You know, that's all they do. do is to ain't naming no names, right? There's people out there who just never did their own thing, just borrowed ideas and never once credited any of their sources, anybody who they're doing a cover tune of, you know. So that's why my recent posts, that's why why I'm talking about Dan Snow, right? I loved his book when I was first starting out. I'd been in business for like a year or two when I bought a copy of In the Company of Stone, and I got to reread it. I've read it like once in '08, and I might have reread it in 2000. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I only read it once. I don't know. In any case, I want to reread it one of these days. The guy's writing is great, and his work is incredible, and has wide-spanning influence, even influencing people like myself, who the work wouldn't be immediately apparent. My work doesn't look like his. But first time I was ever interviewed, my big break, some magazine is going to do a humble little feature on me. They email me a few questions. Right away, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and give credit here. I name dropped somebody, and in that article, they not only put up 2 links to my own website, which was incredible, they also linked Dan Snow. How cool is that? To always, and for the rest of my career, know that that's how I started. And then other people would have come around and copy notes off of my sheet of paper here, right? And never mentioned me. All right. Here's one of the ways that we are different. I don't know, maybe I'm wording that too strongly. It's early morning, I've got a long commute to work here, and I'm all caffeinated, so hey, no offense. But I allow myself a small measure of personal satisfaction, or pride even. That, I conducted myself that way. I built myself up legitimately. It takes a long time. It takes decades, in fact, to get to where I'm at right now. And you think you're cheating me? You think you're cheating the world? No, you're not. You cheat yourself. There's no reward better than the journey, than the adventure. The shortcut is shorting yourself. You don't short the world. You think you cheated the world. It's like tracing an image of art and be like, oh, I created my own thing. Well, you traced. Maybe you trace it, if you want to trace it and add a little something of your own, okay, cool. And maybe you're just learning, and tracing is part of how you're going to learn, okay. Whatever, I'm not criticizing anybody's path of how you're going to learn. But to get the real reward, it's going to be a long haul. Anyway, am I still talking? We'll catch up later, all right? Thank you for tuning in.